Hi, this is Mike Balaban. Welcome to Bammer and Me. My guest today is Dastan Kasmamytov, a 30-year-old Kyrgyzstani native now residing in Berlin, Germany, who has an amazing story to tell. I can't wait to get this out to you here. Dastan, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to do this in two parts because despite being only 30 years old, Dastan's life has been pretty filled with amazing accomplishments and challenges. And I'm looking forward to him sharing some of them with you here. Let's start at the beginning. You're originally from Kyrgyzstan, though you've been living in Germany for 6 years.
Yes, exactly.
Most of our listeners probably have no idea where your country is situated, much less what it was like growing up there. Would you explain that for them?
Yes, in Kyrgyzstan, growing up is probably quite different than growing up in Western Europe or in the US, especially in the way that how our society works. Yeah, it is very conservative and patriarchal society that puts a lot of value into a family and family connections. I was brought up in a way to uh, like in those very rigid and gender norms. So I was always taught to be a man or a boy in that case, and to fight, for instance, or not to cry. I was not allowed to play with the dolls, and I didn't really understand back then why not, because I really loved to play games where I can, so to say, imitate a family. The thing is that in Kyrgyzstan, it's also very important what the extended family says and what other people say about you and your family. And that's a huge societal pressure onto you as a person. And of course, being gay is no go for the family. And in general, I was brought up by like quite a normal family, I would say, in Kyrgyzstan, a bit more educated rather than many others, because both of my parents finished the higher education. That's why they were like quite progressive, I would say, in comparison to many others in Kyrgyzstan. But still, when it came to homosexuality, they had problems with that.
Would you also describe where it's located? Something about the surroundings?
Sure. Kyrgyzstan is in Central Asia. It was a part of the USSR
So, the
until
Soviet Union.
the Soviet Union until 1991. Now it's independent, but still very dependent of Russia and neighboring China. Exactly whatever happens in Russia, by the way, influences onto us. So when they introduced this propaganda law in Russia basically against any information about LGBT,
The so-called anti-gay propaganda laws.
exactly, so-called anti-propaganda law. They wanted to introduce that law also in Kyrgyzstan. And also the news, for instance, from Russia are influencing what's happening in Kyrgyzstan a lot.
So being a satellite state nearby and under the shadow of such a large neighbor is extremely influential in terms of what goes on and the life among daily Kyrgyzstanis.
Definitely, yeah. And that's why I believe whenever the situation in Russia gonna change, it will also bring a lot of change in the whole region of Central Asia.
And there are something like 6 or 7 stans, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, right? And they all pretty much follow that same orbit.
Yes, exactly. They are all more or less under influence of Russia in different degrees, of course. But I have to say that all those countries are quite different from each other. So Turkmenistan is actually like North Korea.
Right.
It's very there is a dictatorship over there.
Yeah.
And Kyrgyzstan is probably on the other side of the spectrum. We are the only country in Central Asia that is more or less democratic, that has more or less free elections. Of course, we have lots of problems with human rights, with LGBT rights, definitely.
And the other common factor, I believe, is that all of them are Muslim in essence, yes?
Yeah, that is true. Islam plays a huge role in terms of uh, the societal norms. Yeah, how the gender norms, homophobia that exists, also influenced by Islam, and Islam plays a huge role for many people in Kyrgyzstan. My family was not that religious, yeah, so they're Muslims as well, but they followed only the Islamic rites when someone died or on some very important events. So they've never been actually to mosque before
Wow.
my coming out.
So, well, that raises other questions. But so let's talk about coming out, or rather, how old were you when you first began to realize that you were attracted to other guys? And then when did you actually acknowledge to yourself that you were gay?
After talking to you, Mike, last time, yeah, I realized that actually there were moments in my childhood and in my teenage ages when I definitely had interest into other men without realizing it. And one of those moments, for instance, was my attraction uh, to the boots of men in the movies. I couldn't explain it back then why, but I felt it like it was something really cool, very attractive. I was not aroused back then, yeah, sexually, but something was happening definitely, yeah. And I was imagining also people around me, men around me, wearing also boots, and somehow I I don't know, I felt like it's something cool and something was happening within me.
So what Dastan is alluding to is when I first asked him this question, he started answering about when he first developed attractions to specific boys and men and knew that there was a sexual component to it. And I had to explain to him that before we even develop the hormones that come along with adolescence, before we start to become sexual beings, we are still often drawn, as he's now volunteering, to other boys or men for reasons we don't understand that I would describe more as affectional preference rather than sexual preference. You are attracted to them by something about their personality. You want to be close to them, you want to become them, and you don't know why. So that's, I think, your foundation was grounded in boots, which is kind of an early form of Tom of Finland, if you are familiar with that little subculture. And then when did you acknowledge to yourself that you were probably gay?
That happened when I was around 15 or 16, after I started to dream about other men. Um, yeah, or like when I started watching porn and looking rather to the male bodies, to the men rather than to women. Yeah, when I started also to have night dreams about guys. Yeah,
Wet dreams or just dreams?
Uh, at first, they were just dreams, and they were even not sexual. I would say, yeah.
Sure,
When I
sure.
was, yeah, kind of like, for instance, clearly remember that a cool friend of mine was kissing another school girl friend of mine, yeah, and I believe, yeah, the dream kind of like I don't know. I felt like it was like a bit of introduction to the whole homosexual dreams, because in a way it was like sort of heterosexual, nothing like was happening. They were sort of kissing, but I remember that in that dream my attention was on the guy, yeah. And later I started to have different kind of dreams about guys, and on some point I started later to look for gay porn or pictures of naked men. Back then, I believe it was hard to get porn movies because of very bad internet. In the beginning, I was looking for pictures of naked men on internet, because the porn videos, needed much stronger internet connection. And I also remember that my mom somehow got that those research results from Google. Not results, but like when you type in Google, like
Search history.
search history, exactly. Yeah,
And she saw what you'd been looking at.
Yeah, she saw that I was looking for what I wrote. I think I wrote something like the pictures of men in underwear. Yeah, that was definitely underwear.
Well, that's better than pictures of naked men.
Yeah.
You bring back a memory of my own, which is similar. When I was 5 at kindergarten, and we played doctor with a guy and a girl behind the kindergarten tree in the backyard, I only wanted to look at him, not her. I didn't know what that meant, but we have early indications of our inclinations before we're aware of their significance.
Well, I mean, like, you have a very good memory, but I don't believe that, like, in my childhood I had similar things.
It comes at different points in everybody's life. So would you explain how you came out to your parents? And obviously you alluded earlier to the importance of extended family in Kyrgyzstan, but how that played into your family when you came out.
The decision to come out came after I came back from my studies in the US.
Which was at what age?
I was 18.
Okay.
I was 18 back then. And I remember that during that time, I had changed a lot. For the US, I was saying to myself that I'm bisexual. Yeah, because by telling that, I was like sort of giving myself probably hope that I gonna turn straight, or I don't know that I gonna mm, have in the end like a heterosexual family and kids and stuff like that. But in the US, I realized no, I'm actually gay.
Where did you study in the US?
I studied at Pierce College, University of in Washington, state of Washington.
You said Pierce College?
Pierce College, it's in Tacoma. Yeah.
For 1 year?
Yeah, around 1 year. I remember also there was in Tacoma there was a youth center for LGBT, and I was standing outside for I think an hour because I was really afraid to go in. Yeah, that's one of the points in my life that changed me a lot. Yeah, because
And did you enter?
I did in the end. Yeah, I forced myself.
You did. And
Yeah,
what did you discover?
I was afraid that someone gonna see me entering first, and I was also afraid of whom I gonna meet there and how they gonna react. Yeah, but they were so friendly and they were so accepting and welcoming. They told me that there is the center where I can go to where only young people meet, and it's hidden and no one knows about the place. And and visiting, I think every week I went there for like informal meetings. There were also different events going on. I went even to one activist workshop, like a proper camp. I remember also I was even rock climbing there. Yeah, so that time in the US helped me a lot to accept myself. Oh, and another really interesting story. Once my host family told me, okay, let's go clubbing, to me and to other international students. And I was like, I like underage. I'm not allowed to go to any nightclub. And they meant there is a club called Neighbors in Seattle that is like open for everyone after 2 a.m. because they don't serve alcohol. We drove there, and I remember how I was standing in the line and I saw a trans diva or cross-dresser in the line, and I was like, this is interesting. And it turned out to be a gay club. It was my first nightclub in the US.
And your host family introduced you to it.
Yes. And later, I told them like 3 or 4 years later. I came out to my host family, and they're like, "Oh, we knew that. That's why we brought you to a gay club." I was like, "How did you know?" Even like I was not sure that I'm gay. So this was like an interesting part, I would say, of my life. I still don't know how they got to know that I'm gay.
Maybe they saw your search results too.
Yeah.
So tell us about when you decided to come out to your parents and how that went. I thought that story was particularly interesting.
This happened when I was 20 years old, 19, 20. And it was very important for me to tell that because I was constantly lying to them when I was meeting someone for a date or stuff like that. And my parents were like the closest people to me. And I saw how proud they were of me and what I do in my life. And uh, I just felt I have to say that I'm gay. Yeah, and it was not easy. So we were dining that evening, and I told them basically, "Hey, mom and dad, I have to tell something to you, and probably you will not like it at all. You will be shocked." And then I could not say those words, "I am gay." So they got just like worried, asking questions like, "Did someone get pregnant?" Uh, I said, "No." "Do you take drugs?" "No." Do you have HIV? I replied again, "No." My mom even asked, "Did you kill anyone?" And I said again, "No." Um, and then finally they asked me whether I'm gay. And I could not reply to that question, but it was already clear that I'm gay. And um, that there was a long period of silence. At least I felt like it was quite a long, yeah, period of shock because at that moment I probably, yeah, destroyed all the dreams that they had about me, that or about like future family and children that they're gonna have or things like that. And it was completely something new to them. And when my mom asked, "Do you want to heal yourself, to treat yourself from homosexuality?" At that moment, I said yes. And because I felt like if I would say no, um, I would even destroy their expectations in like even more. So I didn't want to confront them at that point during that evening. So I just said no.
Well, as you
Uh,
explained it to me, you felt like there was a lot for them to react to and adjust to, and doing it all at once was too much. So you wanted to give them a little hope, and then over time, be able
exactly,
to.
yeah. Because as I explained already, that I needed myself a lot of time to accept myself as a gay person,
Right.
and definitely my parents need the same time to understand that it's okay, it's normal. Yeah.
You want to explain the shame that will permeate a family, the extended family, if that news gets out in Kyrgyzstan?
Yeah, so I believe my parents were really afraid of what others gonna say about me, especially the extended family, because being gay is definitely in our society and many other societies is is a complete, yeah, yeah, is a dishonor to the family name, yeah, to my last name Kasmamytov, yeah. So when someone is gay in the family, it means the whole family blood is kind of, I don't know, yeah, like
Tainted?
yeah, tainted, yeah. And yeah, so that was a big issue for me and for my parents, to be we were afraid that we will be left out of family gatherings, for instance, or we will not be invited to the weddings or.
So as a result of you sharing it with them, did they keep it a secret and not tell anybody else in the family initially?
Initially, yes.
Yeah.
So we kept it as a secret, of course. Yeah.
Your family has learned that you're gay. They've reacted as well as you might have hoped in the country and the setting in which you lived. They're not happy. They think you're open to treatment. What happened next?
So first, they wanted to do it a proper way. That we went to the Republican Center of the Psychiatric Health, where my mom was told. I was also there. I heard it. That the homosexuality is not a disease. They can't really help in any way. But they gave a number to my mom, and they.
So let me just interrupt to make sure readers understood. You were sent essentially to a mental health clinic, to a psychiatric association, and that she hoped would be able to help cure you. And they said, sorry, there's no disease. This is normal. And they gave you another number. And that number was?
Exactly. They gave it number, and it was, they said it in a very weird intonation. So my mom told me, okay, I'm going to go there myself. She went there and told me later that it was a weird place, like very dark street, no ring bell, and she had to knock at the door. The door opens, and there's a huge rainbow flag hanging on the wall, and trans women, I think, opened the door, and she's like, "Okay, they will not help me here." But they asked her, "What does she want?" And my mom told that she is a lesbian and she wants to cure herself. And they were like, "Oh no!" They tried to explain it's not a disease, things like that. Yeah, but what I did, I took that number.
So did your mother give it to you anyway?
No, I did it. I just made a picture of that number previously. And then later I visited that LGBT center. It's called Labris in Kyrgyzstan. They had the community place. Yeah, and that's how I started to be involved in activism. And but at the same time, my my mom was mostly trying to cure myself, and she went then to different fortune tellers, to the religious leaders. So she actually became, she was ready to believe any religion, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, doesn't matter. If that religion gonna like cure me, she gonna believe in that. Told me, and she was going to the church every morning, I think at 6 a.m., to bring 3 liters of holy water so I could drink it the whole day, wash myself, things like that.
So basically, she was desperate enough for a cure that she would have done anything to help change you.
Exactly, yeah. I also remember that I was finding like different weird things in my room, like a knife under my pillow or some kind of substances. And once I was forced to get a calendar of one of fortune tellers with his face, and he was like really like not the, I would say, not the cutest and handsome man in this world. So every time my friends were coming over, I was taking down that calendar. I had to learn to pray in Arabic, for instance. Yeah.
How long did this go on for?
For several years, until they noticed that I started to have depression, apathy, and problems at school. And then my mom realized, okay, this is not going in a good direction, and she stopped.
So in the meantime, you got involved with the center, right?
Right.
And gradually You were so active in it that I believe you went on its board of directors.
Yes, that happened much later, but during my involvement, while I was in Kyrgyzstan, I was actually almost working basically. I had even my salary at some point. Before that, I was volunteering a lot, of course, and doing mostly advocacy work.
Advocacy, yeah.
Advocacy, sorry,
Yeah.
because many people from activist background, they don't really have uh, much knowledge and skills to do advocacy. And advocacy also implied a lot of work with media, with governmental institutions,
And they couldn't afford to be out in their situations, presumably.
first to be out, of course, and secondly, for instance, if you needed to work with international organizations, you needed English for that, or writing skills or things like that. And and unfortunately, not many people had those skills. And
Did you learn your English all during that year in Washington, or had you been studying all along in Kyrgyzstan?
I was lucky that I went to a school in Kyrgyzstan that had a focus on English language. So and during my activism, I actually saw a lot of cases. Um, I was in the a special um, group where we had to go to for instance, to the police and be with the victims of violence and help them. And sometimes I had to go at night even, and I saw so many things and so much injustice. And also, me myself experienced a lot of problems with the police.
Did they harass you when you went to report these problems or to try to intervene? The police, did they harass you?
They like me personally, I got into a few several cases. Yeah, like one was when they tried to intimidate us, me and my previous partner from Kyrgyzstan. We were walking in one of the parks and we kissed, and someone noticed it, and the police came and they started to intimidate me personally, like threatening and threatening my partner. He was not out back then, and he had to pay money. That they blackmailed him.
A bribe, yeah.
Yeah, and then once I had also weird situation when an activist friend of mine gave me a card, very erotic, where two gay men were doing rimming, and I had it in my backpack.
Did you say rimming?
Yeah, there were one guy was rimming another.
Okay.
and and the police stopped me and my partner back then in another park, and they searched us and they saw that card. And again, it was not very nice, pleasant situation, of course. But this time, it went more or less okay.
How did you escape those situations? You have to pay money, or
mostly I had to pay money, or I didn't pay money because I was outed, and
right?
I talked to my family and I said, okay, tell my parents.
Yeah.
They know about it. So, but the problem was mostly for my partners.
Yeah.
That they were not out.
So, what happened next is going to be pretty fascinating for our audience here. You found yourself, through a combination of circumstances, becoming the poster boy for gay rights, LGBTQ rights in your country. Would you tell us how that happened?
Exactly. So Human Rights Watch, the international organization, was doing a research in Kyrgyzstan about police violence against gay and bisexual men. And they also interviewed me, but many other gay and bisexual men in Kyrgyzstan. And later, they were looking for people who would participate in the press conference when that report was published. It was hard. I mean, there was no one who was ethnically Kyrgyz who would say, "Okay, yes, I'm ready for that." But I decided that I want to do that, and I need to do that as an activist. Um, I talked to my parents. They didn't like it, of course, at first, but they said, "Okay, do whatever you want." But they actually did not really support my decision. The decision.
Well, clearly they realized what the
Mhm.
implications and repercussions were going to be for your family, right? And for all of the, I mean, it would suddenly place them in the spotlight.
Yeah, I think back then I was not really realizing what the implications could be. So, and that was probably, looking back right now, I would say I would do the same, um, but back then, after coming out and experiencing many things, after that public coming out, back then I was telling myself, why did I do that?
Yeah.
Um, and but anyways, the press conference went well, and I was all over the media, like on TV channels, in newspapers, magazines, and so on. And then the next day, what happened is that the semi-governmental religious authority, Muftiat, issued a fatwa, which is like kind of religious law, saying that all gay men should be stoned to death because Muhammad said so. And after that fatwa, um, there were many attacks against LGBT organizations and activists, including me. I personally experienced a physical attack in the city of Osh when, I was hit into my head, and um, so it was the first time when it came to blood, literally. And another time I was, the car um, was sort of like, it hit me from behind, and I don't really remember anything. I woke up in a hospital, but the people who saw it, they told later to my dad and to uh, uh, the people who came to the ambulance and so on, that it's yeah it was a bit crazy because the driver seemed to be um, either crazy or he did it on purpose. So he just accelerated with his car and hit me. And I don't remember.
How many incidents of violence did you experience, and were you hospitalized more than that once?
Um, I experienced, those were two major cases. There were also, of course, the other cases when I was threatened a lot. I'm not talking about uh, online or on media. That I can't even count those cases. But in real life, I was like, for instance, uh, recognized in one of the gyms in Bishkek, um, where the owner of the gym called me out and said, "Hey, listen, guys are gathering in the gym and they want to beat you up." So if you want to leave alive, you should go now. Yeah, and I left immediately. And this is crazy because like now, like in Berlin, where I live, the gyms are the gayest place ever. Yeah, but yeah. So and again, there were many other examples like that where I was recognized in the streets or threatened, or my in the comments below the videos that were posted with my coming out. Some posted also personal information about me, my sister, things like that. So I felt really, really threatened. My family felt really threatened.
It just goes to show that while it may have decriminalized homosexuality, making it technically legal in order to access those AIDS funds, clearly the underlying culture and the conservative Islamic religion didn't change this conditions at all. The homophobia and the violence against gays was as strong as it probably was in those other stans in the neighboring countries. How long did you contend with these conditions, and why did you stick around? Given, I mean, I realize leaving your home country is not easy. Why did you stay as long as you did, given the threats to your health and maybe even life?
Because I believe that it's an important time to make change. Uh, After my coming out, by the way, the parliament started to introduce the law bill. They had a law bill on propaganda as well.
Just like in Russia,
Exactly, just like in Russia.
Anti-gay, yeah.
But it would be worse because they wanted to criminalize basically. And I would say there would be recriminalization of homosexuality because you could not talk about LGBT
Right.
at all, and you would go into prison for that, or to show any like symbols or whatever,
Or support.
Or even support. Yeah.
So what happened to that effort?
We fought back, and we drew attention of the international community to that. Of course, we tried to build a network of allies in the parliament.
Mhm.
We tried to do a lot of work behind the curtains, the scenes in the parliament, and so and there was a lot of pressure onto the deputies who initiated that law bill. So in the end, it was forgotten, but it came to the second reading, yeah, and after that, it was in a way forgotten. Yeah, and I believe at that time, like there were also many other political changes happening in Kyrgyzstan, um, in a good way. You know, freer elections, more freedom of media, and I felt like this is a crucial time for LGBT activism as well. Um, yeah, but again, unfortunately, I experienced all those cases of violence and threats, and not only me, but also my parents, and they forced me, uh, yeah, to apply to for different scholarships in Europe. Um,
Well,
so I can
they convinced you, right?
Yeah, yeah, of course they convinced me, but it was like my mom was telling me that every day, every single day, you should leave the country, you should apply somewhere, you should go. It's not safe for you, and so on. So it's yeah.
How much of that, and this is not an easy question,
Mhm.
maybe not fair. How much of that was motivated, do you think, by their love and concern for your health? And how much of it was selfish concern about their own reputations in the country and in the family?
I think with the reputation, they lost it anyways before that. So it was not an easy time for them as well. I think it was definitely concerns about my health and life, and they just they love me even if we had issues. how we struggled with all the treatment and things like that, or that my activism being exposed as a gay family basically to all my relatives, and but they loved me and they wanted the better life for me, and that's why they were forcing me as well.
So, how did you select Germany? And let's explain to the audience why you chose to apply under a student visa designation rather than under a refugee visa designation.
Exactly. I was thinking of also actually applying for asylum status somewhere. But after researching, I realized it is first not easy. Yeah, I would probably get an asylum in the end, most probably. But it's also really hard to be an asylum seeker in Europe. The conditions that you're living in, the homophobia that you face, because you stay mostly in the dorms, where people from different societies, some very conservative and patriarchal societies also come, and people are being threatened and sometimes also, physically uh, attacked, and going through the whole bureaucracy. And then later in life, because you have that stamp of a refugee, will not probably, I thought back then, will not make my life easier. And I had this other opportunity to come to Europe as a student. And I grabbed that opportunity. But we should realize that not many people have that possibility to study, because
why was it available to you?
Because I could speak languages, foreign languages, because I fulfilled the requirements in order to enter universities in Europe. And I had the skills and background and experience to apply for different scholarships.
So you applied and are studying IT, information technology, correct?
Yes. So first I actually did my master's in Norway. And then I also studied here in Germany. After that, I moved to Germany because I developed a relationship with one guy, and he could not move to Norway, so I had to move to Germany. Yeah, but we broke up in the end. And but in the end, I decided to stay in Germany because I found a job as well here. Yeah.
Doing what?
But I am a programmer.
Okay.
I'm a software engineer.
Right. And as my understanding is that for various reasons, when you complete your studies, you will be able to transition into residency, permanent residency status. Is that correct?
Exactly, yeah. So I can stay here legally forever, yeah.
And the advantage of that is that you have remained on the board of the LGBT Center in Bishkek. Is that the name of the capital?
Yes, I remained as a board member there, and during my absence in Kyrgyzstan, I was thinking, okay, what can I do? Because here in Europe, I felt a bit depressed that I'm no longer involved in LGBT activism as I could. I'm not there in Kyrgyzstan, and I came up with different ideas how I can still be involved and bring something to LGBT movement in Kyrgyzstan, to contribute to the LGBT movement in Kyrgyzstan while being here in Europe. Yeah.
So if I understand, some of that involves writing articles that get published in Kyrgyzstan around issues that move that activism forward. Some of it involves helping plan events, and the advantage of having the the student visa, unlike the asylum or refugee visa, is you're able to freely come and go back to Kyrgyzstan, which the refugee visa would not allow you to return home without threatening the loss of that status. So you go back and forth, you attend events, you write articles, and we'll be speaking in our next segment, a separate interview with you, about how mountain climbing, mountaineering has become a platform for you to be an advocate as well. Is that a correct summary of what you're doing from Berlin?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So my parents always tell me that I come to Kyrgyzstan, do some things, turn the things up, and then go back. And they have to deal all with those my media interviews and things like that.
It's called an agent provocateur in French.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, do you feel threatened when you go back? Is there a risk of violence each time you return?
Yes, and for some reason, I became much more concerned now when I go back to Kyrgyzstan because more and more people recognize me. There are more uh, uh, media writing about me, for instance, and uh, yeah, um, it's not easy to come back, but I feel, I'm always excited about it, and of course to see my family first of all, and friends and co-activists. But
We didn't discuss it. You have a sister. Do you have other siblings?
no, I have a sister. Yeah,
Yeah.
she's
And we also didn't discuss your personal life either in my prior conversations with you or today, except you mentioned you had a partner in Kyrgyzstan and one in Germany from Norway. Have there been long-term relationships in your life?
uh, my longest relationship was 2 years,
Uh,
unfortunately, probably because of my very crazy life, I would say, and because of my movements from one country to another.
well,
Yeah.
clearly being in Kyrgyzstan and dating someone most likely who is not out provides a lot of risk for them. So as much as you may feel for each other, it's a barrier, an obstacle that's really hard to overcome. But hopefully that issue, living in a place where you can be open, will be less insurmountable.
Yes, here I feel myself safe. First of all, yeah, I in Berlin I can, if something happens, I can go to the police, and people sometimes gay friends of mine here sometimes do not appreciate those little things that are seem to be normal to them, but absolutely not normal to me. I mean, it's such a big deal, yeah, to be able to go to the gym, which is in fact even gay friendly, and that will not kick you out because you're gay. To um, to have an
Yes,
access to justice, to have those freedoms that unfortunately I didn't have in Kyrgyzstan.
it's kind of amusing. In that sense, you and I share similarities because, I'm 69 and I came out in the 70s, 1976 at 23, 24, when you could be kicked out of your family or church or fired from your job. It was considered a mental illness. You could be put in an institution and given shock treatments. So I too, and people my age too, often look at the amazing freedoms that most young people have. It depends on where you live and your family, but around being open about who they are. And the complaints and the fact they take this for granted and don't have any sense of the progress and the luxury of living such a life. But you know, that's to be understood. If you grow up as something being normal, you don't understand how valuable it is.
Exactly. But there is still a lot of work to be done here as well. I had also several cases of being verbally attacked in Berlin, and even during the gay pride in Amsterdam, which is crazy, yeah. uh, for being apparently gay, and so those moments um, like especially in Amsterdam, I was like a bit of mentally destroyed because I came to, so to say, a safe haven to Europe, and here as well. Even here, we face still some injustice and those such such kind of threats. And
Well, the problem is in a world where people are most comfortable with others like themselves, any difference brings out fear and opposition. So homophobia, racism, sexism, all of these continue to exist even in a world that's largely improving. Now, has it gotten any better, do you think, in Kyrgyzstan in the decade that you've been an activist, or is it pretty much exactly the same as it was in 2011?
no, it got definitely better in the way that we are now more visible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after me, there were some other people who came out publicly, including transgender people, including lesbian. Um, and this is great. This is like awesome. I'm like, and the media post something about me. There was an article, for instance, um, uh, about the campaign that I do, and there were lots of comments, like thousands of comments, but many of them were like positive, supportive, and this didn't happen back then when I first came out. Yeah, so also the allies have now power to openly support LGBT communities, and this is great. I think through allyship, yeah, a lot of things, good things are happening now in Kyrgyzstan.
Yeah, we rely upon allies to move the needle for us and to push our rights forward because they have access to power in a way that those of us in the community don't often have, certainly at the beginning. One other thing you shared with me, and we'll discuss exactly the context in our second interview in a little more detail as to why, but your visibility has elicited comments and contact and input from Kyrgyz in small towns, in other countries, telling you, way to go. Is that correct?
Yes, and this was personally very important to me because after my public coming out story, I got a lot of messages also from LGBT communities saying, blaming me for anti-LGBT law bill in the parliament against this fatwa that came out.
So basically telling you because you chose to challenge the establishment, they were claiming that you were making life worse for them.
Exactly, yeah. And of course I was like, wait a sec. I mean, like, I'm putting my life at risk, and now you're blaming me for doing wrong things. And that I was really upset about those messages. But later, after a year, I started to receive a lot of messages from far away in the mountains in a small village somewhere in Kyrgyzstan. Young guy wrote to me that he had no idea that someone like him, like gay people, even exist in Kyrgyzstan. He didn't come even to the idea to Google about it because he just didn't have that in his mind. Yeah, and uh, or like the story of the Kyrgyz guy living in China historically, because we're also Kyrgyz in Xinjiang region of China. He also sent me voice messages on Instagram, thanking for my coming out story in Kyrgyz. He couldn't even write in Kyrgyz. He just sent me voice messages. Probably there at school, of course, they don't
China is suppressing any individuality, and particularly when it comes to the Muslims in the far west of the country. They
Yes,
won't
exactly.
let them use the language, for example, as you said.
Yeah. And he also shared a bit of his story. It's quite hard for him to be first of all, like in the ethnic minority as a Muslim in China and being gay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so it's a double pressure from both sides, let's say.
I have a parallel. I have an Instagram page, Bammer47, and I put out a lot of our history through my eyes with my vintage photos over 45 years. And I received comments from a 16-year-old in the deep south of the United States, very conservative area, basically thanking me, saying he looked forward to my posts more than anything that gave him hope about life that lay ahead for him. And I was touched to the point of choking up when I first got that. And the problem is, of course, because he's under 18, I'm really not able. He wanted to reach out to me privately, and I can't do that. It would be illegal. I had to basically give him advice through the comment section of my page until he turns 18, or send him to resource centers like LGTB, centers where he might obtain that help. But I understand how it feels for you to finally be, for lack of a less loaded word, vindicated and validated for the risk you took to your own body and health on behalf of belief that something better was possible for all the LGBT community in your country. So I want to congratulate you and thank you on behalf of those who can't reach out to you for everything you've done in this last decade and for making yourself available today. And we'll continue with part 2 shortly. Do you have anything else you'd like to add before we end?
No, I think I told a lot. Yeah, here was a very good interview here. So like you, pull out a lot of information.
That's my role here. Well, thank you for being with us here today, Dastan. We'll continue with part 2 shortly, and thanks to our listeners for checking in.
Thank you a lot.
The podcast you've been listening to is produced by Mike Balaban and Tom Walker, recorded and researched by Mike Balaban, with editing and music from Henry Lay.